Good afternoon, Chairman.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody to today's Schools Forum. Just to run through a few little announcements. So today's meeting is going to be audio broadcasted and recorded. When you're invited to speak, if you wouldn't mind unmuting your microphone and putting your video on. But if you are just listening, then it's probably best if you turn off your camera and turn off your microphone to enable us to kind of hopefully keep the bandwidth working and keep everybody connected as best as possible. If at any point during a debate anybody would like to ask any further questions or raise a point, they're requested to use the chat function. If you've not used Teams before, there is a speech bubble at the top there which opens the chat function, and you can just indicate in the chat that you would like to speak by writing the word speak, and myself or Josh as the vice chair will keep an eye on that chat and call you in at an appropriate time. When we move on to a new item, Katrina will let us know when we're moving on. And if you are having to leave the meeting at any point, can you please indicate that in the chat so that we know for the minutes that you have left the meeting. If at any point as well that you do lose connection, I recommend that you kind of leave the call and then try and rejoin, and we'll let you back in as soon as possible. If we are made aware at any point that the connection has gone down, then we'll obviously pause the meeting until we can get that reconnected. And if not, then we'll look to do it at a later date. So that leaves us with making a start, I think, today. So over to you, Trina, to confirm the presence of all members and officers.
Thank you, Chairman. So good afternoon, members. So prior to the start of the agenda, can I please ask members to confirm your presence when your name is called? Amy Stancer. Present. Ian Randall.
Present.
Thank you. Catherine Stratton.
Present.
Michelle Anderson. No. Rachel Barrett. Rachel, are you there? Is she there? Present. No. Professor Durans. Yeah. Steve Barrett-Wanath. Is he there? Oh, hold on. Just admit this one. Gavin Booth.
Yes, I'm here.
Katie Gravel.
Hello, yeah, I'm here too.
Simon Morley.
Present. Hi, everyone.
Hi. Leah Mason.
Hi, yes, hello.
Josh Greaves.
Good afternoon.
Andy Watts.
Yes, present.
Julia Merivale.
Yes, present. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Martin Shelton.
Yeah, hi. I'm here.
Is there anybody that I've called? Is there anyone that hasn't had their name called?
I've just seen Michelle pop in.
Yeah, I've just seen Michelle.
Me, I think Trina, I just arrived.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, I'm also here.
Simon Pickett's
Katrina,
also around.
Katrina Kendall, I told what you were present, but I had my microphone off.
Okay, thank you very much for letting me know. Thank you.
Right.
And Francis Green, Trina.
Present.
Brilliant, well done. We've all had a little break from this, haven't we? We're now having to get re-used to being back on Teams and on Zoom again and all these things. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for attending today. My name is Gavin Booth. I am the chair of the Schools Forum. So we'll move on to item 1, which is look at apologies and absence replacement members. So Trina, do we have any apologies for today?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. We've received apologies from Joe Slessor, Daniel Callahan, Dr. Stephen Hopkins and Peter Tomlinson.
Excellent, thank you very much. Moving on to item 2 then, declaration of members' interests. Do members have any interests they wish to declare? If so, can you just speak in the chat for me? Let's give you a second, just in case there is anyone. Nope. Great, thank you. Moving on then to the minutes of the forum held on the 24th of June. So the question is, do we accept the minutes of the forum from the previous meeting held on the 24th of June? I've had a look. I'd like to propose them as an accurate record. Do I have anybody that's prepared to second those for me?
I'll second Julia.
Yeah, we've got several people. So Julia, Francis, Ian and Professor Durans all happy to second, or third and fourth and fifth, those meetings. So thank you very much. So it's therefore proposed and seconded that the minutes held on the 24th of June be approved. Are there any members that want to abstain? I don't think so. Any members wanting to vote against those minutes? No. In that case, then we'll accept those as an accurate record of the meeting of the 24th. Thank you very much. So moving on to item 4, Chairman's announcements. So following a round of recent elections, I'd like to welcome back Michelle Anderson and myself back to the forum. Thank you very much. And we're delighted to be back. I'd also like to welcome to the forum Andy Watts, who's a new union rep for us, and Peter Tomlinson, who is a new faith rep. Welcome both. Thank you very much for giving your time. And also extend my thanks to any outgoing members, including Martin Kyle, Helen Stokes and Paul Thompson for all their contributions at previous meetings. So thanks to them. There are going to be a round of further elections coming up. So again, if you can go back to your respective sectors and try to encourage people to put themselves forward. I think one of the things that we are going to look at later in the meeting today is whether this continues to be an online meeting. If so, that could be quite a good selling point to other members who might want to come and fulfil those vacancies if they haven't got to necessarily decamp to Lincoln for every single meeting. But we'll come on to that later in the meeting. So yes, keep your eye out for further elections and do what you can to encourage people within your sector to fill those vacancies. It'd be great to have a full house. So moving on from that to item 5, which is the Schools Forum Self-Assessment Toolkit. And this is as a direct response to something that was raised by one of the forum members. I think you remember Dr. Stephen Hopkins raised this at a previous meeting about the fact that there was a self-assessment toolkit for schools forums, and we took that back, and Mark and team have had a look at that. So Mark's just going to present the outcomes of the self-assessment. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, as you'll remember, in June, in the Schools Forum, an update to the Lincolnshire's constitution and membership was presented, and the forum supported that. And in that, it included sort of changes such as the ability to have a remote meeting as well. So as part of that change, so that was formally approved by our executive councillor on the 10th of September. So obviously that is now in place. And at that meeting, we discussed about sharing the roles and responsibilities, and I know Trina circulated that around to the group. And also as part of that, we also considered the actual Schools Forum checklist. And as you'll see, that's in your agenda pack, detailing a number of questions, and myself and colleagues, and obviously consulted with the chair. And we populated that. So as you will see there, it assesses the framework of the forum's operations and assesses the strengths and weaknesses as part of that. So overall, if you go through that schedule, that toolkit, what you'll see there is that we've documented in each section and also determined whether we feel that we're compliant in each section. And overall, we feel that from our perspective, that the forum is running in accordance with the expectations as set out by the Department for Education. I will, however, draw you to one section. So that's section question 11, and that talks about the induction pack and training programme available for new members. The first part of that, we would say that that is in place. But in terms of the training offer for new members, or indeed existing members, that is something we had in place a number of years ago. However, that does need to restart. So that is something through this toolkit that we've identified as an area that we need to develop we have that material. It's the case of updating that. So that will be a piece of work that will be taken forward, and then giving new members, and indeed existing members the opportunity to participate in that, and if you feel the need for upskilling or just refresher training, well, that option will be there. So that'll be something that will be taken forward, Chair. But other than that, I'm happy to sort of take comments from members for any areas of sort of further inquiries, and it is only to note and obviously learn from any points raised by members. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll just jump in first on those. So, I mean, we know that we previously circulated around the roles and responsibilities. Is that something we're going to try and do annually? I don't know can't quite remember when that was, but can we put that in our kind of workflow just to send that out as an annual reminder to people about roles and responsibilities for Schools Forum members? I think that'd be really useful. And then, do we have any time frames around when the training might be able to be available to people?
I mean, we can certainly look to try and start that in the new year. I'm just recognising sort of work pressures in terms of getting us ready for the publication of school budgets and going through sort of detailed budget setting exercises. But that'll be something, we can certainly launch in the new year.
Yeah.
So that's fine. That will be on our work plan. And also just the first point as well. So you'll remember that the constitution of membership has to be tabled to the Schools Forum annually and reviewed. So as part of that, we can include within the pack the powers and responsibilities section.
Great, thank you. Anybody else got any questions they would like to raise? You just indicate that you would like to chat in the bar at the side. If not, then we're all happy to kind of note the document presented. Fantastic, thank you very much. Right, we'll move on to item number 6 then. This can be found on pages 23 to 31 of your report pack. We're going to invite Lizzie Bowes, Strategic Finance Manager for the Schools Finance team, to present this report to the forum. And we're asked to note the contents of this report and to comment on steps to ensure the national funding formula is affordable. So we're asked to note the contents. Over to you, Lizzie.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. So we bring this paper to the forum each October, providing an update on the national funding formula for the following financial year. In terms of a brief background, the formula was introduced in 1819 to create consistency in funding. 2022-23 sees the final year of the £14 billion investment in primary and secondary education announced in August 2019. At the moment, the local authority decides on the funding formula within the DfE funding framework. The local authority has replicated the formula since its introduction. However, in 21-22, although we were able to replicate the formula in terms of monetary values, Lincolnshire had to set the minimum funding guarantee at 0.5% due to the increase in free school meals from the pandemic in order to ensure the formula was affordable. In July, the DfE announced their funding intentions for 22-23. The Dedicated Schools Grant will continue to consist of 4 blocks: the Schools Block, Central School Services Block, High Needs and Early Years. Provisional allocations are detailed in the middle of page 24. The Schools Block is calculated by aggregating schools' notional allocations under the formula with a separate rate for the primary and secondary sector. Lincolnshire's position compared to the national average are detailed at the top of page 25 of the report. You can see that Lincolnshire's position has continued to improve, but is still below the national average. Changes to the formula within the schools block are detailed on page 25 and 26, and I'll now highlight some of those key changes. The key formula factors will increase by 3%, with free school meals funding increasing by 2%. Minimum per pupil funding levels will increase to 4,265 for primary and 5,525 for secondary pupils. Every school will attract an increase in their pupil-led funding of at least 2% if the formula is replicated, subject to affordability. The minimum funding guarantee will be set between 0.5% and 2%. Following consultation, the methodology for paying rates bills will change for all schools and academies. Rates bills will be paid by the ESFA directly to the billing authorities. Schools and academies will no longer receive a rates factor within their budget. Officers are awaiting further guidance as to how these costs will be treated in the accounts, and a communication will shortly be issued to all schools and academies to advise of this change. Further financial support will be provided to small and rural schools by increasing the sparsity factor by £10,000. The methodology of calculating has changed from a straight line to road distance, and officers are awaiting data in order to be able to model the impact of this change. Free school meals over 6 funding will now be based on the October census rather than the preceding January. And Appendix A provides a funding comparison of the formula factors from 21-22 to 22-23. When we have previously consulted on the formula, schools and academies have supported the local authority approach in terms of the desire to replicate the formula in full. Due to minimal changes in the formula, the positive news in terms of the monetary increases, the forward outlook to replicate the formula, and affordability options having been consulted on in the past, once modelling has been undertaken, if the local authority is able to replicate the formula in full with no funding issues, there will be no requirement to consult. However, at this moment in time, officers have not received documents that detail the latest refinements detailed in this paper in order to undertake modelling. If the modelling identifies a different direction of travel, i.e. not being able to replicate the formula, or a requirement to submit a disapplication request, the local authority will need to consult. Officers will provide an update in terms of affordability at the January meeting. Moving on to the Central School Services block, funding will continue to comprise 2 elements: ongoing responsibilities and historic commitment funding. The rates for the ongoing responsibilities are detailed on page 27. Historical funding will reduce by a further 20%, and there continues to be a challenge to ensure a sustainable outcome is achieved for the PFI contract. Within the higher needs block, the provisional allocation has increased by 7.63 million, and the funding floor has been set at 8% again. Lincolnshire has received protection funding of 8.8 million, and hospital funding will also increase by 8%. The increased funding is welcome, however, detailed budget setting and trajectory work needs to be undertaken in the autumn term in order to substantiate the requirements of high need spending. As you'll be aware from previous meetings, we continue to witness a growing trend nationally and locally with young people requiring specialist support, which continues to have a material financial impact on the high needs block. Transformational work is well underway, and the progress of work streams is being measured. Information regarding the early years block will be released in the autumn. We still await guidance regarding nursery school supplementary funding, which currently ends in March 2022. We've been advised that pupil premium will continue for 22-23, but the rates have not yet been confirmed. At the bottom of page 28, there's some information regarding the action that local authorities must take if their DHE goes into deficit. So in conclusion, the funding announcements are positive news for Lincolnshire. 22-23 is the final year of the current funding settlement. Therefore, it is important that schools are provided with the same level of financial certainty at a national level in the next funding round. The higher needs block continues to be an area of concern and will require careful and prudent management. The next steps are detailed on page 29 of the report, but include awaiting receipt of a modelling tool to allow officers to undertake financial modelling to fully understand the impact of the funding announcements, including the impact the pandemic will have on free school meals over 6 data. A final version of the APT will be released in December, which must be submitted by the 21st of January 2022. And as is normally the case, school budget shares must be published by the 28th of February. And as I said before, subject to affordability, the local authority intends to replicate the formula in 22-23. And finally, at the start of the paper, I detailed how the local authority currently decides on the funding formula within the DfE funding framework. The government have conducted their initial consultation on how further reforms to the formula could be implemented with the intention of moving to a hard formula. This would mean the DfE setting the formula for all schools and academies, removing all local authority responsibility in the setting of school budgets. The local authority has responded to this consultation, stating the importance of retaining local flexibility and decision-making powers for all aspects of schools funding. The risk and impact analysis are detailed on page 30 and focus on 3 areas: affordability of the schools block, the reduction of funding of historical commitments in the Central School Services block, and the long-term financial stability of the high needs block. So the forum is asked to note the content of the report.
Great, thank you, Lizzie. Can I invite any questions for Lizzie, please? You just want to indicate that you'd like to chat in the chat bar at the side for me.
I think chat's muted, Gavin.
Oh, is it? In that case, just turn your camera on and I'll try and pick you out. Right. I don't think that is so. We're just being asked to note the contents of this report at this time. And like Lizzie says, if there are any significant changes, then obviously there'll be a requirement to reconsult at a later date if necessary. But fingers crossed that's not the case. Right. Thank you, Lizzie. We will then move on. Moving on to item number 7. This is the de-delegation of maintained primary schools budgets for 22-23, 23-24. Can be found on pages 33 to 47 of the report pack. So Mark Popwell, Head of Finance, is going to present the report for us. Just to make you aware that this is an item that will require just those maintained primary school representatives to vote against at the end. But that doesn't prevent the rest of us from chipping in, asking questions and supporting our colleagues of the forum with anything that they might want to ask. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the government's decision to implement the national funding formula still allows de-delegations, arrangements for maintained schools to continue. So there are permitted services for maintained schools, de-delegations. Ultimately, what they are, they're delivered and governed by the local authority, subject to obviously the decision of those maintained schools forum representatives. So this is something that's been in place since the reforms of April 2013. So key features of those arrangements include only maintained primary and secondary schools are applicable for de-delegations of their budget shares. They have to be voted on at a sector level. And also in terms of any reserves, any underspending arising from these de-delegated budgets, as a point of principle, should be earmarked for the benefit of those maintained schools in that sector only. So on page 34, it outlines the de-delegations position from the financial year 2021, the last financial year. It details those de-delegation budgets termed under 2 headings of contingency, and those relate to termination of employment costs, schools in financial difficulties, and then those exceptional unforeseen costs. And the other one is ethnic minority and traveller education team. So no funds were de-delegated for maintained secondary schools. It was only maintained primary schools that had those 2 de-delegation areas. So the cumulative underspend reported at 31st of March 2021 was 861,000. Included within this sum is an amount of 260,000 relating to school advisor support, which was council funding contributing towards supporting our maintained primary schools. That remaining sum leaves a 601,000 available reserve. And within that, in terms of last year's financial performance, it showed an underspend of 289. So quite a material underspend, or 29% of the overall budget in 2021. And the largely contributing factor from that was actually the pandemic itself. So structural changes within the schools were delayed, reductions in intervention bids, and less focus on school improvement activity, but more of a focus on supporting schools through dealing with COVID-19. The following paragraph then outlines those key variables and the financial impact that has on these budgets, and in particular the reserves. And therefore it is important to retain a level of reserves, prudent level of reserves, to support for those variables. However, what we are raising is that actually the level of reserves is actually higher than we'd initially planned, and the report considers use of a part sum of that available reserve. So then moving on to the de-delegations for 21-22, so those were that agreed in the October 2020 Schools Forum. So moving on to page 35, you'll see the budgets that the de-delegation budgets are financing. So the per pupil rates identified for contingency and ethnic minority and traveller education team were used as part of the calculation of the school budgets and recouped and retained centrally to fund the following areas of termination of employment costs, interim head teachers, primary intervention funding, and then the MTET service. Information on those services are outlined in Appendix 1, and it gives the detail in terms of how those monies were deployed, the output, the impact that those services are having, to provide that necessary detail to allow for decision making. So then, considering the use of the reserves. So the primary maintained school continuity term budgets are obviously demand-led in nature and do require a level of prudence. So therefore, we propose to retain 300,000 provision within those available reserves to ensure that level of certainty to be able to respond to any unexpected costs, whether that's increased demands from the primary maintained schools. So that's what we're proposing part of the reserves to be retained for. So then, considering the remaining sum of money, so that leaves a 301,000 level of reserves, where we're identifying a proposal to commit some initiatives towards that funding. And what this is to do is to support those maintained primary schools in responding to the pandemic. So as we come out of that, and also addressing the learning needs of those children that have been most disadvantaged. And what this criteria would fall under is the de-delegations criteria for additional school improvement services. So obviously, as the sector moves out of the pandemic and accountability measures return, and the return of regular Ofsted inspections, that support to schools in returning to school improvement activity is a priority. And the second two paragraphs of pages 35, at the bottom of page 35, you'll see there the Lincolnshire's position in terms of where we sit with our overall performance. So Lincolnshire children are performing less well than the majority of their peers nationally, and Lincolnshire schools are also performing less well than both our statistical neighbours and also the national average. And it shows the importance, the section there about improving those averages and those outputs, to show the importance of that early intervention. And this is what the proposal is really about. It's about that early intervention to try and support the development of young children as they go through their school career. So moving on to page 36, the LA proposed to deliver a 2-year programme to increase pupils' fluency in reading by year 2, and then to work towards providing a sustainable model to ensure the ongoing development of this approach in Lincolnshire. Whilst this programme is proposed to be funded through the de-delegation, it has been encouraged that standalone primary academies and those within multi-academy trusts to prioritise this as well, because we feel it is an initiative that will be hugely beneficial for all schools and indeed those pupils in those schools. So subject to obviously the support of the forum members, once that 2-year programme is complete, time will be built in to ensure those light touch development days and suggest next steps as we refine that practice. So that's looking at the reserves position. And now the proposal, which also requires a decision on from those two maintained head teachers, primary maintained head teachers, is the proposals for 22-23. So it is proposed that the maintained primary school de-delegations contingency term budgets will remain in place. So that's the proposal, and the baseline funding will be, however, flexed to respond to the changes in the number of maintained primary schools and their pupil numbers. So if more schools choose to become an academy, that level of quantum will reduce, and the local authority will have to manage that. So the LA continues to review the deployment of this resource, particularly those considered to be in financial difficulties, to ensure it does deliver the most effective education support outcomes. One thing the local authority has identified is that the most impact in schools is from additional expertise being deployed into those vulnerable schools to work with the leaders, to add that capacity and to address those immediate issues. And in order for that to happen, we've identified as part of that resource is that the capabilities to deploy more additional school improvement professional people into school. So as part of the proposal in terms of the funding quantum, we are looking to redirect that to resource to deploy within the actual schools through an additional education locality lead. So to support in those schools in doing that. And this just to clarify, this is a different approach to the National Recovery Programme, which is focused around pupils. So I then turn on to page 37. So it details there about the actual approach to those contingency term budgets, about how we can support our most vulnerable Lincolnshire schools, but also Lincolnshire maintained schools, but also the universal maintained primary school as well, so all of them. So looking at how we can best deploy the resource available to ensure no school falls behind. And it will be deployed through a hybrid model. So looking at this central team to try and support those schools, but also the ability for those particularly in financial difficulties to bid for those additional specialist activity support through the intervention fund to enable sort of rapid, quick improvements to be made, particularly about securing their Ofsted at the point of their Ofsted inspection. The other part of the delegations remain to the MTET service, and this is a staffing cost, so it's a fixed budget, and we do obviously review the requirements on that, and within the appendices you can see there the support that they provide to the schools. I mean, particularly with the Afghan refugees, etc. So this is a role that a team that supports that role and the integration of young children. So a request on that one is to ensure that we retain that fixed budget of 186,000 as part of that. So in the middle of page 37, you'll see there the proposed funding rates that we're setting out. So the £29.23 for the contingency items remains exactly the same level as what we've previously sought to recover to support those central budgets. And you'll see those budgets, how that funding is used and how it is being deployed. The MTET service, that is an indicative amount because clearly we don't know the October pupil numbers at this present point, and therefore that pupil number will be refined to ensure that the 186,000 budget is retained. For the proposals for 23-24, and this is just purely in principle, and it's about providing the service with some stability in terms of the continuation, and again seeking the forum members' views of the continuation of that to enable us to have that sort of financial stability and structure. So then moving on to page 38. Just summarising it in terms of the decision making. So this is seeking the decisions made by the maintained primary representatives of the forum, and subject to the decision, if it is supported, those will be reflected in the school's maintained primary school budgets for 22-23. So that's everything, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. Does anybody want to come in there and ask any questions? If the chat's not working, just turn your camera on and I'll pick you up, hopefully that way. Ian Randall, please.
Yeah, hello. Hi, everyone. And sort of linking this item, I'm kind of a little bit thinking out loud, but linking this item back to agenda item 6 and the initial consultation on national funding formula potentially moving hard, I'm sort of assuming that would mean potentially in the future there will be no dedelegation if that was the case, or at least not as much. So thinking about that and thinking about the fact that you're obviously looking at sustainability, you know, we wouldn't want to see key services such as the MTET go, even if we're not using it, we'd want it there now. Is there evidence that a hybrid model is or will work, as in art academies buying in these services that maintained schools are de-delegating for to make them sustainable in the future? If that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I mean, in terms of the first point about the future of the national funding reform and the hard formula, so clearly on that there is in the consultation there is no time limit with that. There's no desire for them in terms of a set number of years to move to that, and clearly that has been the direction of travel from central government since 1819, and only circa probably half of local authorities are actually on that national funding formula. So there's still some way to go, and clearly these consultations are about trying to push local authorities a bit closer to that to move step changes. But as part of our consultation response, that localism was something obviously we echoed strongly to ensure these type of arrangements could continue. the de-delegations wasn't referred to in those consultations. But so it will be a case of trying to understand that position. But they have made it clear in operational guidance from year to year the importance of having de-delegations and that opportunity. And it provides that insurance fund for the maintained schools. If they ever got in trouble, they know they've got that extra support to help them recover from that position. So one would hope that the government see that as a focal point, that we would still have an opportunity to support our sector on. So I'm not worried at the moment. I'm not jumping it in terms of it's going to be stopping overnight. I think it's a long-term, the national formula, and we will have plenty of opportunities to contribute and put our views forward about what it should look like going forward. So that's something that many local authorities obviously will be representing similar views. In terms of the maintained and academies, so at the moment it is purely for a maintained arrangement, and what you find is with academies, particularly on sector support, is that they often have that within their trust themselves. So they have that resource, deployment of resource, to be able to go out and support them as part of a multi-academy trust arrangement. And in essence, this arrangement is very similar to that, in that we identify where those needs are and obviously look to deploy those quickly. So as part of my terminology of like the hybrid approach, it was more a case of how we were going to deliver it, i.e. through the locality lead arrangement, but also the opportunity to provide funding for additional expertise to be put into the school, or bespoke packages to assist the school.
Great,
thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Professor Durand, please.
Could I ask Mark, Chairman, you referred rather sadly that our primary schools are not doing too well. Does this read across to the primary schools? I think there are 41% of them now are academies. Does this read across to the primaries in the academy sector? And secondly, if I may, Chairman, because our young people are not doing so well, are we doing something about it? And what is the reason? Is it like a finance, or is there some other reasons why they're not doing so well? Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Professor. I'll bring Sue into this, who's from School Improvement, but I would add in terms of that data that's representative of all Lincolnshire schools, not just the maintained sector. So I'll introduce Sue.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sue Williams, Head of Education Strategy. In answer to that question, yes, that data there is all schools, so that's the academy sector and the maintained sector. I think it's also worth noting for forum members that data is 2 years old, so that is from 2019 data, but it just gives an indicator of when the last national data position was in place, where schools were. And I know you've had reports on that in the past, and you'll be having a report on that in the future. So that is just a sort of worrying position, and that has been a sort of declining position. So it is something we want to address. It's also something that we want to support schools to do better, particularly the maintained school sector, where we're looking at that delegation funding from, and where the local authority is responsible for those schools. So it's really about supporting those schools to be able to improve, to be able to do better. Where we've had that direct work with schools, the schools have done well and improved. But we want to work with more of our schools more closely, which is we've started to do that this year, but particularly after the pandemic, to ensure school leaders are in that strong position to move their schools forward and support them in doing so.
Great, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Sue. Catherine, if you've got a question.
Yes, please. Thank you. I just wanted to ask where the evidence of impact is analysed or presented for the local authority finding the most impact in schools is adequate leadership capacity, and what evidential data there is to support that in comparison to the actions academies take or the actions that other local authorities take and if if that direct relationship is evidential.
We haven't got direct evidential relationship of academies. We know obviously the outcomes of the data for academies and the outcomes for Ofsted inspections for academies, and we work closely with CEOs, having conversations and regular updates with CEOs where any concerns about academies within a trust would be shared. We also work with the DFE about any concerns with academies where they would be shared. But we don't have analysis of what those CEOs and what those academy trusts are actually doing to make improvements in their schools. In our own work in the schools that we've worked with within the local authority, the analysis of work that's been done in our schools shows that where there's been that direct work and schools have been involved in projects, and some of this has been presented to the LLP in a data report some time ago, that the schools that have that direct work are involved in projects tend to improve. The outcomes across the board tend to be weaker because we're not doing that work with all the schools. So the schools where we intervene, whether that's through locality lead support or on programmes, have improved, but we're not generally getting that support. So we might have 40 schools in a programme that improve, but we need to do that wider, which is why this is looking to work with all the schools on something that would be more fundamental for improvement across the sector for all children.
Thanks, Sue. Any further questions for Mark or Sue on that one? Okay, so it's over to our maintained primary school representatives. They're asked to agree to the proposals for use of the de-delegated reserves and also for the delegation of budgets for the 2022-23 period and the 23-24 period in principle. Trina will ask you whether you are for, against or wish to abstain. It's worth noting, again, going back to my previous point about encouraging to fill in the vacancies, there should actually be 3 primary maintained head teachers and 3 primary maintained governors, and at this point we only have 2 out of that total of 6 primary representatives. So again, we need to make sure that we're filling those vacancies going forward. So I'm afraid at this time it's over to Ian and Catherine. So Trina, I'll let you do the voting on this one.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, if you could confirm, Ian and Catherine, whether you are for or against the proposals as outlined by Gavin. So, Ian.
Yeah, I'm for them. That's fine.
Thank you. Catherine.
Yes, I'm also for them.
Thank you very much. So, both for then, Chairman, so that's carried.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you two as well. And we'll move on now to item number 8. Which is the revised school budgets for 21-22. So this is on pages 49 to 60 of the report pack. So it's back to Mark again, who's going to ask us to look at this one. And we're asked to note the contents of the report and then support the local authority's proposal for the use of the uncommitted sum that you'll see in your pack, and Mark will outline as he goes through. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much. So as some background then, so the dedicated schools grant, obviously a ring fence grant that can only be spent for the purpose outlined within the DFE schools and early years finance regulations. A revision of the schools budget is necessary each year to reflect the under and overspends arising from the DSG in that prior year. And under the DFE regulations, underspends are automatically carried forward to the following financial year. And LAs must consult with the Schools Forum, as we hear today, over its plans use in terms of those underspends or addressing overspends. So on page 50, so provisions are made within the regulations, which require the LAs with overspends on their DSGs to carry them forward to be dealt with in the new financial year or indeed future years. And this will be subject to DFE oversight. Local authorities can actually apply to the Secretary of State to disregard this requirement. However, with the financial pressures impacting local authorities, finances generally, added with the impact of that COVID-19 impact, LAs will be required to find that solution within its DSG management. So it's helpful to provide that context in terms of ensuring we have a sustainable dedicated schools grant. So the schools carry forward for 2021. So the cumulative underspend carried forward at 31st of March 2021 was 10.5 million. Before accounting for existing commitments, of 5.9 million, leaving an uncommitted sum of 4.5 million, being representative 0.71% of Lincolnshire's overall dedicated schools grant for 21-22. And this reflects the net overspend of 1.1 million on budgets in 2021 held centrally within the DSG. What I'll do is I'll take you to Appendix A, which is on page 55 of your pack. And those 55 and 56 and indeed 57 cover the main under and overspends resulting in the dedicated schools grant across those 4 blocks. What I'll do is I'll draw out those key areas. So the high needs block overall overspent by 2.4 million. It is the second year that the high needs block has overspent, even allowing for the increases in funding that local authorities have received. So there was a net overspend on high needs top-ups. So this is high needs top-ups within the mainstream schools and targeted funding of 5.7 million. And this is down to growing trends within Lincolnshire requiring more specialist support. And it was obviously from the amount that we previously budgeted for. So the government did respond to the funding challenges in 21-22 as part of the settlement to help local authorities like Lincolnshire manage the increase in growth that we're experiencing. We also had an overspend of 1.2 million on our external SEND placements, so specialist placements. These are outside of our school sector. Academies are maintained, and that's largely down to the increase in demands with pupils with complex needs, but also because of a shortage in places in our special schools. And as you'll be aware, the Building Schools strategy in terms of the special school provision, the 86 million investment, it is about creating all need provision, but also an increase in the number of places to be able to place within pupils within their own communities. What we did have is some underspends to help manage those overspends I've referred to in alternative provision. So we've had 4 new free schools across Lincolnshire, and the Department for Education, through their guidance for new schools, fund for the first 2 years the place funding, and that is whereby you'll see there an underspend, a temporary underspend as a result of that. What we've also got there is on commission contracts heading. You'll see there that there was a number of commission contracts whereby, due to the pandemic, those services were under-delivered. However, to ensure their financial sustainability, the contract payments were made, and which we were able to charge that under-delivery of costs to the COVID-19 grant that the local authority received. Therefore, obviously, creating that underspend within our own dedicated schools grant. And also the Healthy Minds, how that service responded to the pandemic and supporting schools and pupils. We were able to fund that from an alternative funding source in the Outbreak Management Grant, again creating a temporary underspend within the high needs block to bring it down to an overall overspend of 2.4 million. So clearly, managing the budgets for the current year, it is responding to an in-year deficit and how we can manage that going forward. If I then move on to another block in terms of the early years, the local authority, in accordance with the government's guidance, supported early years financially throughout that period up until December 2020, based on parent declaration hours as opposed to actual participation that took place. That provided that stability not only across the 3 and 4 year olds, but also the 2 year olds as well. The largest underspend related to the 2 year olds, and we had budgeted for a fluctuation fund where we often see growth. However, during that period, we didn't actually see that growth, but that will be a budget that will be required going forward in terms of setting those fluctuations. And then I'll move on to the Central School Services block on page 57. Two areas, prominent underspends relate to historic commitments relating to the school's broadband service and the school's private finance initiative contract. Those budgets have had to be set prudently because of the government's reduction in funding, 20% per annum. And it's been announced again for 22-23, a further 20%. So therefore, those budgets were set prudently. And also, we've got an uncommitted sum within the formulaic arrangement of supporting schools, of which our Directorate leadership team will be reviewing that to see how it is deployed. And you'll see there the summarised position against each block, showing that total net underspend, I should say, from 2021. So if I go back to page 50, and section existing commitments. So a thorough review has taken place of those existing commitments, including updating decisions made. Prudent financial estimates have also been made in those areas. And that identifies commitments of 5.9 million. And you'll be familiar with a number of those commitments. They have been to the Schools Forum over a period of years. Those are detailed within Appendix B. I'm sorry to jump around. If we go back to page 58 of the pack, those commitments are identified. And I'll briefly talk you through them and happy to take questions on them at the end. So the first commitment relates to the early years disadvantaged 2-year-old money. So this is monies that we received to support the introduction of 2-year-old from central government a number of years ago. Those monies have been earmarked and, in fact, now being reprioritised to respond to the earlier sector challenges as a result of that, as a result of the pandemic. And as you'll see in their sections, in that section explaining the concerns about sort of children's personal, social, and emotional development being a key priority. So the proposal is to expand the remit of this funding within this earmark reserve to support that longer term outcomes for all early years children through this targeted supportive programmes. So that will evolve over time. So that's been the Directorate Leadership team's initial steer, and we'll be looking to develop further plans and refinement on that and sharing that with the sector. We've then got sector-led investment, and this is sort of Sue touched on this a few moments ago. So we have an amount of funding. We've had an amount of funding, and that has been funding has been deployed over a number of years. And the available monies at the moment is 683,000. At the moment, this work has been paused in terms of any further deployment of resources. So the LLP board are working with the local authority to consider the impact of the pandemic, along with those anticipated outcomes from the COVID catch-up premium, the national tutoring programmes. Clearly, we don't want to conflict with those. So it's about identifying where we consider using this resource effectively, how best to deploy that. And a detailed report will be coming to the Schools Forum in January, outlining those proposals for your consideration. We've then got a sum of money for school reorganisations, including new schools, extending schools, and potential closures. So this funding remit, in terms of covering all of those, is there really to support such arrangements where we have insufficient monies within that school growth fund, or where we receive lagged funding. And it enables that financial capacity to support those reorganisations in particular. And also we've got within our 10-year capital programme the identification of potential new schools coming online due to sort of areas requiring quite significant demands in addition to what the school capacity has. And again, any part of new schools will require start-up and diseconomies of scale. So those are in the 10-year programme. So that's why we're looking more into the future and requiring a reserve here to support any such initiatives. Turning on to page 59, we've then got the Special Educational Needs and Disability Strategy, which you'll be familiar with and has had, you've had prior reports on that. about implementing the all needs education strategy across Lincolnshire. A £2 million commitment was agreed in October 2018 to support this programme. Only limited amount has been spent on that so far, because we've only just started the building works, but there's only been a small number of schools that have actually had their works completed. So what we do in terms of that £2 million resource, it's there to support the fixed and fittings of creating new classroom space, because with the increase in the overall numbers of 500 places, we're having to create more classrooms, and hence why we need to equip them. The new building space within the programme, such as sensory and soft play areas. There is also support of recruitment as part of the school reorganisation policy, and also about workforce development as well. But one key element of this is the lagged funding arrangements, and as we are encountering quite significant growth within the special school sector, having that lagged funding, having funding again, any spare monies remaining from that sum will be used to support that arrangement. Schools broadband, you'll be aware that from prior papers that the existing contracts cease in October 2022. And there's work undertaken on a tendering exercise working with EMPSN, the current provider of a large proportion of schools' broadband provision. That is an update was planned to be presented today, but it will be deferred until January. But work is underway with formalising that tender, of which then will be going out for those successful bidders. So in terms of that work, that is well underway and supporting the sector to transition to a new arrangement, albeit through EMPSN, which is obviously a reliable provider, but actually there'll be a direct relationship as opposed to holding a central budget. So this sum is really about a prudent estimate for any potential transition costs as we move from one system to the other. And I'll just draw out two other areas: transition from special schools to mainstream schools. So this is a new agenda about supporting dual registration initially from specials to mainstream for those children that are ready for that step change. And it's about giving the resource, the capacity within that mainstream school to support that individual. So that money has been earmarked. The reason why it's within the reserves is because of the financial position of our base funding, being that there's limited financial flexibility, hence why it's built in here. However, if it deemed to be successful and it's working, then we'd look to try and ensure that it's funded within our base budget requirements. And then the last one is the medical needs strategy, about fulfilling our statutory duty to make arrangements for children, and about accessing school because of their ill health. And it's about that additional wraparound support and to support those individuals. So that money is that initiative has been supported by our direct leadership team, and recruitment has started on that arrangement. So if I refer you back to the main body of the report, so we've just talked about the existing commitments, and then also we now move on to the proposed use of the uncommitted sum. So remaining sum of 4.5 million following the deductions of those existing commitments as we've outlined. There potentially could be other commitments that arise during the year that relate to the DSG remit, and of which we'll have to respond to. The local authority's proposals that the remaining sum is not committed and is held in reserves due to the current spending area of special educational needs and that uncertainty of that financial environment going forward. We feel it is prudent to do that because of the DSG management and how we need to keep it within our quantum. So within the next section details a number of reasons why we wish to do that. You'll be aware through obviously national news releases and the updates from the Department for Education about the number of local authorities, the increasing, I should say, number of local authorities that are overspending on their DSGs, caused by escalating high need spending as a result of demands and the complex nature of children's needs. And based on old information, we haven't received new data in terms of the overall financial position of local authorities. But at the end of 1819, the Department for Education quoted half of all local authorities experienced an overspend on their DSGs, amounting to 250 million overall, so quite a significant sum. But anecdotal evidence suggests that this position is worsening. The DfE have actually responded to support some schools through these challenging times, through this safety valve net that they've referred to. And they've recently agreed for 5 local authorities with the highest DSG deficits worth 97 million. And under those arrangements, those councils signing up to that financial support are expected to have action plans to make their DSG more sustainable in the long term and stop the deficit growing. And the primary goal is about managing demand for EHCs and appropriate and cost-effective provision. There's an indication that there's probably going to be further rounds of that. So clearly, local authorities are in significant trouble. We have available reserves. We're in a very good position, but that trajectory, based on previous reported overspends on our high needs, we're certainly on that curve, but clearly we're putting many steps in place to manage that, but obviously difficult times ahead. So Lincolnshire overspent its DSG by 1.1 million in 2021, of which the high needs block was a 2.4 million overspend, which obviously I've touched on is the second year that we've exceeded the budget. Q1 financial position for for the dedicated schools grant is showing broadly on target, so that's positive. However, those high needs budgets are very large, are demand led, can be difficult to estimate. So therefore, the forecast that we'll be doing in Q2, so this month, will be key to understand that overall position, and will also inform our detailed budget setting that we'll be undertaking shortly. In terms of the high needs block that has been referred to on an earlier report, the 8% funding floor rise is certainly welcomed, and obviously, as part of that arrangement, Lincolnshire is actually in receipt of protection monies above that formulaic arrangement. So that gives a degree of uncertainty, particularly as 2022-23 is the final year of the current school's financial settlement. So we'll wait to hear what happens further in the next settlement period. One thing to draw out is, and we've touched on before, is the outcomes from the central government's 2019 reviews for supporting children with SEND, and the call for evidence, which was the SEND funding arrangements. Those outcomes have been delayed, so we had anticipated these to be shared with us, those outcomes. So we will be operating with those same legislative and financial framework for the foreseeable future, until which time these announcements are made. So clearly, these SEND reviews are about making sure that there's that financial sustainability of future funding, and obviously delivery of high quality support for children with SEN needs. So clearly, like many local authorities, Lincolnshire does face financial challenges in establishing a sustainable high needs block due to those increased demands. You'll be aware of those transformation work that has been undertaken that we've previously referred to, last taken in the June report. And it is intended to secure those further improved outcomes for children and young people, and also ensuring it's a financially sustainable approach as well. So clearly our desire as part of this is to achieve a balanced budget on our high needs spending, whilst also deploying the right resources, the right activities, and being that it's cost effective also. Clearly, we don't want to be in a position where we're having to force to make extremely difficult decisions about retracting our comprehensive early help offer, support packages to schools, or indeed seeking a transfer for schools block to the high needs block. We want to ensure schools have all that funding themselves, and also us to provide that early help support in supporting schools and children stay within mainstream provision. So the uncertainty of future high needs block funding, the much tighter financial environment going forward, the growth that we're still experiencing and the requirements for more specialist placements, and allowing time for the transformation work to be embedded into practices, and obviously seeing those outputs from that requires that uncommitted DSG underspend to remain in place to enable us to secure the DSG over the coming years. We have got other risks within the DSG relating to the schools block, central school services block and early years block, which are outlined in the bullet points, drawing your attention to the PFI arrangements that we have in place, so working with the Department for Education in finding a long-term solution for that, and also about the nursery schools supplementary funding, which obviously this has been touched on previously. At the moment, funding is only agreed up to March 2022. We've obviously made representation to central government on this, and therefore we hope that that will be continuing, but also a fundamental review of overall nursery school funding is needed to provide that long-term financial position, financial sustainability for them. So in conclusion, a number of local authorities are overspending their DSGs. Lincolnshire is currently not in that position with available reserves. However, we can't be complacent. We need to set a prudent arrangement, and transformation is key to supporting that approach. In summary, the Schools Forum is asked to note the contents of the report and support the local authority's proposed use of the uncommitted sum as outlined in section 5. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark. Really comprehensive. Any questions, please, for Mark?
Yes, Chairman. I'd like to say thank you, Mark, for an excellent report. A very complex matter, and your financial vision seems to be paying off. I would just like to ask one thing, which refers back to page 51, a little bit below the middle. We're still having to pay for county placements. I wonder how much that is, and I do believe that in your planning, you're hoping to eliminate it and so that we become self-contained. I just want to confirm that, Chairman. Thank you very much, Mark.
So in terms of that, the external placements, so those could be actually in Lincolnshire, but actually within outside of our sort of maintained and academies sector. I think the reality is that we won't fully eliminate that, because actually there may be the needs of certain individuals that are that significant that actually our provision, it would be very expensive for us to have such provision. So actually it would be probably more suitable for the needs for those individuals to go to those specialist support schools. So we've sort of for children for the deaf and visually impaired and things like that, where the support is required for those individuals. So there will be times where actually it is a suitable placement outside of Lincolnshire's arrangements. But one thing we, as part of that special school strategy, is about creating those places. So actually for those children that we feel can go to either our mainstream schools or with extra support or indeed special schools, that capacity is there. So that's something that as part of that programme, that's what we want to try and support. And what that will hopefully mean is that for those where we've referred to the overspend because of insufficient capacity within our sector, is actually hopefully that will be removed as a result of this journey that we're going in terms of a programme of works. So yes, I can't offhand provide you with what the actual budget was. I haven't got that to hand, but I can certainly tell you what outside of the meeting what that budget is. But yeah, we are looking to try and manage that down, but noting that there will always be the need for some children to be in specialist placements outside of our sort of Lincolnshire Schools group.
Thank you. Steve Baragwanath, please. And then we'll go to Josh.
Hi, thank you, Gavin. Just want to highlight something really from page 55 and 56. The high needs top up, it's overspent by 5.78 million and offset by this DFE funding for the alternative provision of about just over 2 million. How long's that? Just confirm again, Mark. How long's that DFE funding going to continue? Because obviously it's had a significant impact on the bottom line for that area.
It certainly has, Steve. Yeah. So the initial arrangement is 2 years.
Yeah.
So the first 2 years, the offsetting will take place. Hence why we've created a base budget, because actually we need it more for the long term. We have identified a further underspend in the current year, which is beyond the 2 years. So we are following up about that, about dual and single registration and how that data is captured. So we're investigating that, so it might actually be longer than those 2 years, and obviously then we can certainly reflect on actually do we require that full budget in terms of the local authority supporting that. So we have done extremely well in terms of obviously bringing 4 brand new free schools into county, but also have the protection of the place funding as well. But also just to add in terms of the funding settlement, when we balanced the budget for this year, which was ambitious, we set some sort of stretching assumptions in terms of our transformation work. Obviously, the overspend on here was sort of used, so the new monies was used to try and offset some of those pressures. So that's how it sounded like we had an excellent investment of over 8%. It was an 8% increase in funding, but actually it was predominantly, majority of it was actually supporting overspends from the prior year.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Mark.
Thanks.
Josh, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question mark and then maybe a follow-up if I'm permitted, depending on the answer. But it links to your last point really about new monies coming in actually being consumed by meeting demand as is rather than necessarily distributed to the system. So I'm asking the question because it's not mentioned in the paper. Talk about a variety of higher needs pressures, but really the question is about the pressures that specialist settings face, inflationary pressures and similar. And obviously mainstream schools are guaranteed a positive minimum funding guarantee, and specialist settings are guaranteed a 0% minimum funding guarantee. So really it's to draw members' attention to that fact and ask whether your planning assumptions include a positive MFG or a standstill position for existing schools.
Yeah, no, thanks, Josh. Yeah, so as part of the budget work that will be undertaken this autumn, we'll be firstly considering those demands. So what are those demands likely to be based on our current planned funding agreements? So whether that's the top-up rates or indeed our special schools or AP funding formulas, so we can understand what the overall quantum is versus our overall funding levels. We will be reviewing the rates. Quite rightly, you raised that. So mainstream schools will be receiving uplifts as part of that national funding formula. We will be looking, our intentions will be to try and support that within specialist provisions, within the special schools and also AP provisions. So yes, that will be something we'll be financially modelling up. We feel that that is right for that consistency purposes, but obviously we'll need to be cautious of affordability. But we feel it is the right thing that we will be considering the inflationary impact to schools, whether that's your teachers' pay, GLIA, or indeed general inflation. So yeah, that will be something we'll be considering as part of our financial modelling. And indeed, it's being considered when we're working with the special school sector working group.
Thank you, Mark. And Chair, you'll be pleased to hear I don't have a follow-up given Mark's response. Thank you.
Comprehensive response, Mark. So yeah, ticking the box for that one. Right, okay. If there are no further questions, we're asked to note the contents of the report and also to support the local authority's proposed use of uncommitted sums as Mark has outlined. So can I propose that that action is agreed? If you'd like to disagree, can you please say so in the chat for me? Otherwise, we're going to make the assumption that we're all in agreement that that's good to go. Great. I haven't seen anything yet, so thank you very much for that. And then we're moving on to item number 9, which is the standing item of academies and trust update. So I think it's on pages 61 and 64 of the report pack. So is that you, Lizzie, this time?
It is, yes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
So this is a standard agenda item that provides an update to the forum in terms of the number of academies in Lincolnshire. The position is based on the 1st of September, but based on the May 21 census. Since the date of the last report, 3 schools have converted to academies: Horncastle Primary, Gedney Church End and Lutton St Nicholas Primary. The current status of all schools and academies are detailed in the table on pages 61 and 62. Currently, 51.8% of education establishments are academies, which equates to 72.1% of pupils. The projected 6-month position is detailed on pages 62 and 63. The next section of the report details the trusts with the highest number of academies and free schools in Lincolnshire. You can see that the Community Inclusive Trust and Lincoln Anglican Academy Trust have the highest number with 13 in each. There are 35 multi-academy trusts operating in Lincolnshire. 148 academies are members of multi-academy trusts. 41 academies are standalone single academies. The largest trusts operating nationally are then detailed towards the bottom of page 63. The largest of which operating in Lincolnshire is the Academies Enterprise Trust, which has 56 academies, 2 of which operate in Lincolnshire. And the forum is asked to note the content of the report.
Thank you, Lizzie. Any questions for Lizzie on that one? I think we're quite used to the layout and it's quite familiar to us, this one. So anybody got any comments? No, so we're asked to just to note the contents of the report. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Lizzie.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 10, which is just to look at the work programme. It's on pages 65 to 68. It's for your information only, so you can see what's coming up at the next meeting. And I think Mark mentioned as well a couple of times there that we're going to get an update on the sector-led approach and also the school broadband, which I know has been talked about a couple of times in the past, and people are eager to get an update on that one. So that's there for your information. Moving on to item 11, just to make you aware of the future meeting dates. Unless there is a strong objection from the virtual room, I'm happy for these meetings to continue online. I think our attendance has been pretty good, considering they've been online, and also I think it eliminates a whole lot of travel for people that maybe makes life a little bit challenging. So if you're happy to, we will continue online. If anybody has got, would prefer things to change, then do let us know, and we reconsider that next time. But consider that meetings will be online for the foreseeable, and you can see that the dates there. Next meeting is Thursday, the 20th of January at 1 p.m.
Oh, we're back again.
So can I just ask, please, that the dates are agreed? If you've got any issues with the dates, can you just put disagree in the chat for me? No, that sounds good to me. So can I just remain for me to say thank you very much. That concludes the business of the meeting today. Thank you all for your attendance. And we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting, which is Thursday, the 20th of January at 1 o'clock, and it will be a Teams meeting again. Only comment